Hello, welcome everyone. My name is Janet. I am working through the King James's Bible and today I am starting the book of Judges. So we will begin with this book now. So we've got a lot of ground to cover today. The judges are not, in this case, somebody in a court with a wig on. They are heroic leaders that God sort of lifts up. And we're going to see some of these as we go through these three chapters, because today I am covering chapters 1, 2, and 3. You also may see some contradictions with this book, because a lot of what we covered in the book of Joshua kind of comes back into play in this book, so it kind of jumps around a bit. So you might notice that if you've watched the previous videos with Joshua, I will highlight when those chapters come to the fore. So we begin with the passing of Joshua, who is the leader of Israel up until that point. Now, he doesn't appoint a new leader like Moses did. You know, God told him to appoint Joshua the role, and he would then take them over the Jordan River into the Canaanite land, and then they would start possessing their promised land, which Joshua did. He followed the Lord. But he didn't appoint anybody once he passed to take over his role. So maybe this was God testing his people. That's what I see it as. He is sending the Israelites a test now in their faithfulness. So the first narration of this chapter starts with the Israelites as a whole community asking God for guidance on who should fight the Canaanites first. Because remember, there was still a lot of land that they had to acquire. They didn't have it all. And a lot of these nations are still living amongst them. So the Lord assigns Judah. The Judah tribe are to go first and win the battle to conquer their land. Now, Judah didn't have a total faith in the Lord, because they go to the Simeon tribe and ask them to join them in fighting their enemies. And they say, you know, if you come and help us when you've got to go to battle for your land, then we'll help you too. Because this group of Canaanites that they were going to fight had these iron chariots, and they didn't believe they could do it on their own. So they go into battle and they killed 10,000 men in Bezek with the Lord's assistance. And they captured the king of Bezek. His name was Adoni-Bezek, which actually means God of lightning. I think that was to strike fear in all the people, but obviously it didn't strike fear in the Judah tribe, because they captured him and they cut off both his thumbs and both his big toes. And this kind of practice was quite, ruthless. It also, a lot of people in the day used to practice it to stop their, like if they didn't want their sons to go to war, that's what they would do. It kind of ended their days. They couldn't hold a sword, and they couldn't walk properly, so this would kind of end their days of doing vengeance. And the king himself kind of realised he'd done bad himself, so it was like karma, in a way, coming back at him. So the next part in this chapter we've actually covered in the book of Joshua, which was in chapter 15. So now in Judges, which is chapter 1 verse 15, Caleb, who is the leader of the Judah tribe, he offers his daughter Akshah as a prize for anyone who could take down Kirja Sipia, which was also known as Debir. That was the city Debir. And the warrior that comes forth is named Othniel. And I learned that he actually loved Caleb's daughter. So he must have, he was going for it from the heart, because he loved her. And he won the battle, and he captured and seized Debir for Caleb, and he did as he promised, and he offered his daughter as marriage to Othniel. So he must have been over the moon. Now this story gets repeated twice because I believe it's very important. It wouldn't have been put into the Bible if it wasn't. Now Akshah, Caleb's daughter, was his only daughter, and he really loved her. I mean, her name actually means jewel. Now in that day it was, tradition for the man to give land to the husband, not the daughter. So that's what Caleb did. He gave the land of Negev to Othniel for his daughter and him to live in. But I just wanted to read this segment out. It says, one day when Akshah came to Othniel, she urged him to ask her father for a field. And when she got off her donkey, Caleb asked her, "What can I do for you?" She replied, "Do me a special favour. Since you have given me land in Negev, give me also springs of water." So Caleb gave her the upper and lower springs. Now, just in reading that, she asked her husband, Othniel, if he would go to her father and ask for this, but he wouldn't. I mean, I think he was fearful of Caleb because he was leader of this huge tribe, the Judah tribe, one of the biggest tribes. It doesn't say that in the book, but it's inferred that way. So for her to then go and ask for a special gift, because in those days women were only given jewelry or money. They weren't given anything like land or things like that. But because her father loved her, she got off her donkey, and that was a sign of respect, asked her father, and he granted her these 2 springs. So it's showing us that if we really want something and we ask for it, God will provide. And that's what he did here. You know, it's like not everything is set in stone. And if it's coming from the heart, it's coming from a good place, then things can come to be. And some people could read that chapter and think that his daughter is being greedy, she'd already been given the land, to go for more is just too much. Or you could go for the other way of looking at it, which I am, which is the goodness of God is in our requests. Ask and thou shalt receive. And there you have it. The next part of this chapter, we see the Judah tribe now abiding to their promise and helping the Simeon tribe acquiring their land and going into battle for them. And we see that after this, the tribe went to battle and they slayed city after city from the Canaanites. They took down their regions in Gaza, Eshkelon, and Ekron. So I'll just show you the cities that they've now overtaken in the Judah tribe. If you see there in the Philistine area, we have Gaza there, that's one they've taken. We've also got them taking the Ashkelon, which again is the Philistine area, and in Dan, you will see Ekron there. They took over that. So overall, the Israelites as a whole community have got the Canaanites now out of the mountain regions, but not all out of the valley areas. Some have become slaves to them and others have served them as tributes, that kind of thing. So I'll just give you a quick rundown of the tribes and what's happened. So we've got Benjamin. They did not complete all of their victory, so they didn't get all of Jerusalem. The house of Joseph, they conquered Bethel. Manasseh and Ephraim failed to drive out all of their Canaanites. The tribe of Zebulun, they had to compromise with the Canaanites and put them under tribute. Asher, the tribe of Asher, they failed to take down their full possession and they have to dwell with some of the Canaanites in their land. Naphtali, they compromise and make some tributes. And Dan failed to take full possession, and again they have the people under tribute to them. There is a lot of the nations now living amongst them, and this is the fear that God would have, because it's creating that spiritual battle, because they are worshipping other gods to them. They're not worshipping the same gods, and they are amongst them. So it's like they're in their environment, and this is where things get shaky. So that concludes our chapter 1. Now in chapter 2, we have a failure to achieve in the eyes of the Lord, because he asked them to go in there and acquire the promised land, not go in there and have some of the nations live amongst them. That's not victory to him. He wanted them to conquer and possess the entire land. So in this chapter, then an angel of the Lord came up from Gilgal to Bochim, which is also known as Bethel, and said the following, which I'm going to read from the Bible. And an angel of the Lord came up from Gilgal to Bochim and said, I made you to go up out of Egypt and have brought you unto the land which I swear unto your fathers, and I said, I will never break my covenant with you. And ye shall make no league with the inhabitants of this land. Ye shall throw down their altars, but ye have not obeyed my voice. Why have you done this? Wherefore I also said, I will not drive them out from before you, but they shall be as thorns in your side, and their gods shall be a snare unto you. So God has always said, you don't follow his covenant, you don't follow his rules, and things are going to start going downhill. So things did start causing problems. And so this is again one of the areas in which we've covered in the book of Joshua, which was in chapter 24. We didn't get this much detail, but this is when they made that covenant with the Lord, and this is why, because they wept at that point. I thought they'd got all of the land and he was happy with them, but no, he wasn't, because they were still having these Canaanites dwelling with them. He was showing his wrath and saying, you've not come and you've not done this. So they then make this covenant at Bethel, and they call it Bochim. And this is where they make sacrifices to the Lord and then almost return to their inherited land with their tails between their legs. They've got it, but they haven't really fully acquired it. So we see the rest of this going on where they are serving Joshua for as long as he remains, up until he dies. And then the elders take over, and so they are, following the Lord for as long as they are alive. So once we pass through this time period, because just to let you know, Judges, the book of Judges, actually lasts for 400 years. So we go over these details quite quickly, but it's a long time period. 400 years is a long time. So now that the Joshua era has passed, the people and the elders who were with him and saw how God has been a provider and protected them, they have all now passed, and so we have a new generation that grows up, and they have not lived the history of God with the Israelites. And thus they start doing evil things, and they start worshipping the gods of the nations around them. So these gods include Balaam. From the Canaanites, they've also got Baal and Ashtoreth. Now, just to give you a quick glance into these kind of gods, Baal was seen as the god of agricultural success. So he would bring good weather, they believed, and he would, allow their crops to grow. So they were kind of looking at it as a personal wealth. It's kind of something that they were trying to take control of via this god. The other god, Ashtoreth, was a goddess, and she was a goddess of love and sex and fertility. But the thing with her is they had to, sacrifice children, and it was just so corrupt and so sick in the way they were worshipping these gods and how things were coming to be. And the Israelites had all fallen into this trap, and they were worshipping these gods too. And this obviously angered God. His wrath was starting to come, and he would burn these Israelites in ways of delivering them to their enemies. So their enemies would start, stealing from them and taking things from them. And slowly, the demise would come. Whatever they did would fail, because God was no longer their provider. And he's doing this because he's trying to pull them towards him. He wants to see their faithfulness. But as we see in this chapter, there is a cycle that the Israelites keep going around. It's a pretty dark cycle, and this is the pattern that emerges. So God raises up judges to lead them spiritually. But they wouldn't listen to these judges. They wanted them to be just political and military leaders. They didn't want any spiritual guidance from these judges. But every time the Israelites kind of got to a place where they were mourning and they wanted God's help, he would listen and he would provide deliverance to the Israelites. Each time they reached that point to turn back to him, then he would provide. So as I said, God would raise these judges, these leaders, so he would sort of spiritually go into them, and then they would help the Israelites steer on a better path. But as soon as these judges died, they would just revert back to their old patterns. So they would go back, but even worse, just starting to get more into the idol worshipping and just the demise that is going on in these nations. So they did not stop sinning. They were very stubborn. And a stubborn person has a very hard life, and it just starts getting worse, and more pain will ensue until you stop. Now, God was very angry at this point, and he said because they'd failed to keep the covenant they made with Joshua, and that they'd obviously wanted to indulge with their enemies, they obviously wanted it, then he was going to leave them to it, to destroy themselves, creating more bondage for themselves and more pain. So that closes chapter 2, that they have basically just been left to their own devices, and down, down, down they're going to go. So in chapter 3 we see that these pagan nations remained in Canaan with the Israelites. So why did God do this? Well, he was testing their faithfulness. He wanted the Canaanites to get so wrathed on them that they would then come to him for help. Plus, he wanted them to see war as well, to toughen them up so they become warriors, because this was a new nation of Israelites. So he wanted them to become more, strong in their faith and in their being. So these are the nations that are currently dwelling with the Israelites right now. This is the Philistines, the Canaanites, the Sidonians, and the Hivites. And they are testing them to see whether they'd obey God's commandments. But the Israelites further, they intermingle with these nations, they have families with them, so their daughters marry with them, it's like everything the Lord said do not do, and they're worshipping their gods, they're just getting more and more away from God, and they're doing more and more evil. And this, to the point, angers God so much. I mean, he's just like, right. So he brings in the king of Mesopotamia, and they end up having to serve him for 8 years. So I don't want to go into a lot of detail here and how this all happened, but his name is Cushan-Rithathaim, which actually means cushion of double wickedness. So you can imagine he wasn't a nice king to be reigning over them. And actually the area known as Mesopotamia, excuse my pronunciation, it's actually eastern Syria and northern Iraq as we know it today. So these 8 years must have been so torturous to the Israelites, because they start mourning and they're calling to their God finally. So this is when God rises up the first judge, the first leader to lead the Israelites, and his name is Othniel. And this was Caleb's younger brother. And it says, the Spirit of the Lord came upon Othniel, and he began to lead Israel. He took the Israelites to war with the king, and the Lord delivered him, giving the Israelites rest in that land for 40 years. And then Othniel died, so his reign was over. And guess what happened? Do you think the Israelites, stayed with the Lord and carried on that faithful path? No, you're right. Back down they go into this demise. So you see the cyclical pattern that the Israelites keep following. So as they fall back into their old sinful ways, God then gets angry and he brings King Eglon of Moab, who has the Ammonites and the Alchemites, to defeat the Israelites, who then have to serve them as slaves for 18 years. So that's their punishment. Are they learning? No, they keep going back. So at the 18-year stage, they start crying out again back to the Lord. He must have been like, oh my goodness, people, when are you going to learn? So God this time, faithfully as ever, raises up the next judge, Ehud, from the Benjamin tribe. And he was a left-handed man, and he sent a stone tribute to the king of Moab. So that kind of eased the battle there. And as this was all taking place, he made himself a dagger, and he went to the king, hid it inside his right thigh, and said to the king, I've got a message from you, from God. And this king was quite a fat man, it says. He was plump. And so he goes into him, and when his servants leave, because he said he's got a message from God, the servants then leave as he's saying this to him, and he stabs him in the stomach. Now the king, obviously with this in his belly, can't get it out. He goes into his private chamber and shuts the door. So this is when Ehud leaves. He gets his escape. His servants come back thinking that, oh, well, the king must be busy doing his thing. He gets to escape while they are wondering. And then when they eventually realise, he has been killed, he is well gone. So he then blows his trumpet in the Ephraim area, the mountain area, and all the Israelites come down, and he takes them to war with the Moabites. And they killed 10,000 men in that battle. And then they had 80 years rest in that land. So we have another judge that pops up, the third judge, which is Shamgar. He is the son of Anath. And he killed 600 men in the Philistines with an ox goad, and rescued the Israelites from the enemies there. Because obviously, remember, the Israelites are pocketed all over this land. So when we're going over these details, yeah, they're sinning in different lands, and God is helping them come back to him by creating these judges so that they can then follow their ways. So you might be wondering, what is an ox goad that Shamgar used to kill these 600 men? So I thought I would show you. That is what it looks like. You see that clearly there. And that was basically used for poking oxes. It was about 8 feet long, so that's what he used to win his battle in that area and help those Israelites become free from their enemies. And that closes our chapter 3 for today. So we've covered quite a lot of ground in these 3 chapters. We are seeing the demise of the Israelites having no leader now. Now that Moses is gone, Joshua is gone, all the elders that had gone through that wilderness journey, who had the understanding of the greatness, the power of God, these new generation Israelites just don't have it. And they are sort of like going through the old process like they did in the wilderness. They're having to go through the pain and suffering to finally come back to God each time. So hopefully in enough time they will come to God's presence and stay there, stop going back into their sinful ways. But we will see how this book unfolds, and you will see soon what happens to the Israelites. Okay? Thank you for watching, everyone, and I'll see you again tomorrow for more in the book of Judges. Bye now.